My name is Glenn Davenport. This is my lesson from a subject entitled Untangled End Time Events. This may be considered as an appendix to the writing, but I would like to give you a complete outline of future events based on John's writing, because it's written out in the last part of the book of Revelation. So I just want to start out by reading in Revelation chapter 11. Really, I'm not going to be reading it. I'm just going to point out some things to you. But the last 1,260 days of the tribulation period and the natural sequences of events have been laid out in their order. Now, starting with Revelation 11, verses 1 through 6, this is the introduction to the second half. And I have to point out to you that as you read verses 1 through 6, you will see that there was a time allotted for two witnesses. That time allotted was 1,260 days. That is the first half of the tribulation. So everything we have read in Revelation up until this point is all in the first half, the first part. As we start now, we begin in verses 1 through 6. This is the introduction. The middle of the week. The abomination of desolation will occur right here. And it's based on this fact that when their testimony was finished, if they have been given 1,260 days to prophesy, it's finished now. That tells you that the first 6 verses covers that period of time. Then we start with verse 7. There was the death of the two witnesses, 2 men. There's no need to worry much about who they are or what they are. Just understand they're 2 men who knew about that covenant and they didn't like it. They prophesied against it. Tension was great. It was so great that men tried to kill them. Men tried to shut their mouths. Men tried to keep them from telling the rest of the world that it was a bad deal. The devil's in the details. But they couldn't shut them up. But finally, after 1,260 days, the time came. God allowed this to happen, the death of the 2 witnesses. Verse 8, their bodies were lying in the streets for 3.5 days. Verse 12, their life will be restored and they will be caught up into heaven. Verse 13, there is a horrible earthquake. 7,000 people were killed. Possibly 63,000 people will make professions of faith that day. Verse 15, the 7th, that is the last, trumpet sounds. Did you get that? The 7th, that's in verse 15. The 7th, trumpet sounds, that's the last. Preparation for the rapture, resurrection. The stage is being set. We know now that the wrath of God is coming. The resurrection is coming. The judgment is coming. The time of rewards is coming. You know that by reading that chapter. Revelation chapter 12. The nation of Israel becomes the focal point. A coalition of nations move against Israel. Satan will try to destroy the nation. Israel went into divine protection. That is, they went there for 42 months. They have gone into a place of hiding. God has led them there. And then we see that Satan is banned from heaven. We see that Satan is wroth. Woe unto the inhabitants of the earth, and the remnant of Israel is persecuted. After 144,000 of them, 12,000 from each tribe, has been safely protected in the wilderness. The Antichrist, who has already tried to turn the river in upon them to wash them out, drown them out, flush them out, whatever, and that didn't work, he is now turned to the remnant. Chapter 13, the Antichrist will take his place in the temple. The kingdom will become a world kingdom. Verse 7, the false prophet will be revealed. The image of the beast will be erected. Verse 14, the image will speak. People are forced to worship the beast, and the mark of beast is implemented. As far as time is concerned, let's think about it a little bit here. I can't just read it without talking some. The kingdom will become a world kingdom. That is the Antichrist. He thinks it will. He will not rule. He will not have total authority over it, but he'll try to. His false prophet will be revealed, and his false prophet will teach him that he ought to build an image to the beast. Now here's where I want you to see some time. Starting with the day that the Antichrist killed 2 witnesses, the 2 men. They celebrated for 3.5 days. And then, as he discovered that so many of the Jews were gone, he chased them into the wilderness. And there he, I don't know how he did this, turned the river in on them. How long did it take to dig the canal or to come up with the means to flush those people out of hiding? I have no idea. There's no way to know. And then when that didn't work, when the earth opened up and drank the water, then the Jews were safe. His effort had failed. So then when he turned on to the remnant of the Jews, he gave full attention to somebody else. Then the false prophet said he should build an image of this beast. Now, just asking a question which doesn't have a whole lot of meaning, but it does express a need for time. How long would it take to build an image? If it was anything like the one spoken of in Daniel, where they built an image to the king, that one was 90 feet tall, about 9 feet wide. It took some time, just to see that it took some time. And after that, he made the image to speak, and the people were forced to worship the beast. They came up with a mark for the beast. All of this takes time. I don't know how much time. Was it 1 year, year and a half, 2 years? I can't tell you. Chapter 14. Here's where everything changes for Christians. A huge choir of 144,000 men assemble. As you read this, you will see that there is a choir of men, number 144,000. This is a second group. It is not the same as the 144,000 that are sealed in the wilderness. This is 144,000 virgin men who followed the Lamb wherever he went, and they are called the first fruits. Which, putting it together, what I've told you before, these are those who were raised on the day that Jesus was raised, and they followed the Lamb whithersoever he went. And then you will see a band of angels. They were playing their harps. And then you will read about a great thunder. And I just like to think of that as a drum roll. A big drum roll before the star of the show steps out. Now, this is the revelation of Jesus, and most people overlook it. They never see it. So now we have the thunder. Let it represent a drum roll. The music of harpers begins. The choir sings a song that none of us know. An angel orbits the earth, preaching the gospel. Another angel orbits the earth, announcing the fall of Babylon. Another angel orbits the earth, warning against the beast. The rapture and the resurrection take place now, at this point. I want you to be sure to get this. This is where the rapture and resurrection take place. In verse 14, you'll see the white cloud. In verse 15, you'll see the time of the harvest. In verse 16, you'll see the rapture. In chapter 15, the saints cross the crystal sea. They sing the song of Moses and the song of the Lamb. And the words to the song of Moses is given in Exodus 15, and the song to the Lamb, the words are given right here. And then in chapter 16, just after the saints have crossed the crystal sea and stand before the temple of God, there are 7 angels who come out with 7 vials of wrath. Chapter 16 tells us that the wrath of God is poured out. Satan's army meets God's army, and they do battle. Satan's army, verse 14, God's army, verse 16. Now here is where I want people to really pay attention. Here is the wrath of God. And when you read something like, we're not appointed unto wrath, first place, that wrath that's spoken of in that verse, it talks about the eternal hell. We are not appointed, children of God are not appointed unto wrath. We're saved from that wrath. But this wrath is the vials of wrath that are poured out upon the earth just after the saints of God have crossed the crystal sea. Chapter 17, Babylon charged with butchering the saints of God. Verse 6. Jesus puts down the king of the earth in verse 14. Nations turn against nations in verse 16. Chapter 18, Babylon, the center of government, falls. Babylon becomes the world's cesspool in verse 2. People are called out of Babylon, verse 4. Babylon goes up in smoke, literally, in verse 9. All trade comes to a halt. Merchants weep, in verse 11. Merchants weep in verse 15. Shipmasters weep in verse 17. People around the world weep in verse 19. But the saints of God rejoice. Babylon is gone forever. The saints of God begin rejoicing. It's wonderful. In chapter 19, saints celebrate, verse 1. Praises go up for God, verse 3. More praise in verse 6. The marriage supper of the Lamb, verse 9. Jesus descends to the earth, verse 11. The saints descend to the earth, verse 14. Jesus takes full control, verse 15. Vultures are called in to clean up the carnage in verse 17. The end of Armageddon, verse 19. The beast and false prophets are thrown into hell, verse 20. Then chapter 20. The millennium starts. The devil is bound for 1,000 years. The devil is released for a season. The devil instigates the battle of Gog and Magog, verse 8. The war is over, verse 9. The devil is thrown into hell, verse 10. The white throne judgment in verse 11. All unbelievers are cast into hell, verse 15. Chapter 21, the eternal age begins. And that's John's outline of the chain of events for the last half of the book of Revelation. Well, thank you again for listening. Hope I've helped some of you.